Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. This is part 2 of our Jadam Microorganism Solution JMS video series. And today what we're doing is we are at the 24-hour mark since on the first video, we put in the inoculum and the food source into our brew bucket. So we're just going to do a check to see if we've got bubble formation starting and if there's anything, that looks off, or maybe if there's any odor. And also too, we're going to take a pH test just to see where the pH is at. So we're going to remove the fabric cloth and then open the lid up and see where we're at. I brought a little flashlight to maybe get some backlighting on it, so maybe it might show up better on the video. Okay, so here's the big reveal. We're taking the lid off here. And we do have bubbles. I don't know if you can zoom in on this a little bit, but this is at 24 hours. I'm going to put a little backlighting here. And we have bubbles, little micro bubbles that are forming kind of around the edges, and you can see where the heating element is. That's a little different. There's a little more bubble activity where that is. And what we're looking at here is, if you remember from where we left off in the first video, when we added in all the inoculum and that we actually had almost a brownish colored, light coffee tea colored water. And now, as you can see, all of that color is gone, and what we're looking at is kind of an opaque type thing. Let's just check and see if we have any odors. No smells whatsoever of anything. So, and that's normal for good JMS. You shouldn't smell anything. It shouldn't smell like it's, like you're smelling rotten eggs or any odor at all, because this should be using up everything and not emitting anything. So this is well on its way to starting. So we're going to get some good bubble formation, I think, out of this. Typically at this temperature, the solution temperature right now is 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And at this temperature, what we would expect is our JMS will be finished in about 42 to 48 hours. And that's kind of typically how it's gone. So what that's going to mean is we started it at roughly 3:30 yesterday afternoon. So we should be done with this batch sometime late morning tomorrow. It'll probably be ready. So let's just check one other thing to see if we got anything going off that's maybe creating weird acids or changing the pH of the water, maybe even the other way to alkaline. Typically in a good batch of JMS, you should get a pH reading that's somewhere maybe just a little bit above 7 or a little bit below 7. So somewhere between 6.5 and probably 7.2, 7.3 is fairly normal. This pH meter has been primed and ready to go, so we're going to put that in. And we'll see where we're at. And it appears to be settling right around, still dropping. It's going to be pretty close to about 7.1 at this point. So that's not too bad. Now, one of the things somebody say, well, of course your pH is going to be up a little bit because you added salt. Salt does not change, sodium does not change the pH of the water. So what will change it is biologic activity that will maybe create acids as byproducts of what they're doing. So this is not like a lactic acid fermentation type thing, or even some kind of creation of acetic acids or anything of that nature. So there's no real acids being created in here. And when we finish the batch, my prediction is the pH is going to be somewhere around 6.9 to 7. Because it'll actually probably continue to drop a little bit. So that's where we are at 24 hours. So let's check back again tomorrow morning when we're right around 42 hours. Okay, one of the questions somebody's probably going to ask is, and it's a very obvious one, is why does he care about bubbles being generated in this? Well, the bubbles are an indicator of biologic activity. That they're small gases like carbon dioxide and gases of that nature that are being released as a part of the biologic and metabolic activity of the bacteria and all the stuff that are growing in here. So as long as they are being able to, respire, they will create a small amount of bubbles that get trapped in a very thin film on the top. The more the activity that's going on, the stronger the bubble foam will grow. So that's what we're looking for. If we came in here at 24 hours and we didn't see anything except like an opaque surface with, kind of like the regular surface of water, that would be to me a strong indicator that we failed and that this batch was not going to go anywhere. And at that point, I'd probably dump it and start back over. But this is a strong indicator, small bubbles starting to form. The other thing that we're going to check for is at that point is along the edge of the bucket. This is going to create the heat from the metabolic activity of the organisms is going to create a small current convection that's going to move to the cooler side of the outside of the bucket. And so in essence, what's going to be happening is you're going to see water that's going to be moving to the outside of the bucket and then circulating back up. And you'll notice that because what you're going to see is the foam right next to the edge of the bucket is going to be clear. There will be no foam, of any substance around that edge. And when that is very distinct, that is also another indicator that you're really at the peak. So you really got a lot of activity going on, and the actual activity of the organisms in there is generating heat, which is actually helping move the material. The movement of the organisms, the protozoas, etc., they all contribute to that as well. So there becomes a kind of a convection that starts that you can be able to see really clearly. So that's why bubbles are important. That's what we use to determine when the JMS batch is done. Okay, we're at 46 hours now, and we're going to take another look at it and see where we're at. Now, what we got is more bubbles. Got a nice thin layer of bubbles, very small micro bubbles on the top itself. And I think when I'm looking at the edge on the inside, I do see a clearing, a thinning of the foam ring, and I can actually kind of make out that ring. And this to me at this point would be actually finished and ready for application. And here's the reasoning why on it. It's not like you always get a nice big head on it, like a nice beer. It really depends on the time of the year, and it depends on the temperature, during daytime. If you go up higher than 72, you start getting the 75, to 80, you get a lot more aggressive growth in the microbiology, and they tend to make much bigger and stronger bubbles and will actually make more foam. So one of the things to note on this is in the winter time, and Young-Sang Cho says this in his book, he says what you should be expecting is there would not be as strong bubbles, but that doesn't mean that the biology isn't working. It's just a different type of biology. You have to remember this is a living brew. So depending on the time of the year, depending on max and minimum temperatures, particularly when you're doing this ambient, you can get a much stronger, more vapors and things like that, creating more bubbles. And so at this point, you can see it, and we'll show pictures of it zoomed in, that there is definitely a clear ring. And it's probably my experience during the wintertime so far has been, this is about as good as it gets when we've had temperatures like we've had. And even with the heater on it, keeping it consistently at 72, it never really got much above 72. But if it got more 74, 75, it would make a big difference in the foam level on here. So in my opinion, this is ready for harvest. And so we'll do the next step of how do you harvest it. Okay, the last steps that we're going to do just before we take everything apart here is we're going to do an odor sniff test, and we're going to take another pH reading. Now I'm already a foot away from it and I don't smell it at all, but I'm going to stick my nose in it, and I don't smell anything.
Yeah, that's what you say.
That is what I said. Correct. Okay, so we're going to check the pH, and hopefully Now my prediction was that it was going to be somewhere around, well, let me just turn it a little bit there. It was going to be around somewhere around 7 to maybe a little less. Needle is still dropping. It looks pretty close to going to be near 7. I was thinking 6-9, but so that is important. 7, that seems to be the pH. So it's neutral. So there's no real acids or anything of that nature that's causing the pH to change one way or the other. The other thing is that it's important to note, some folks may ask and say, well, you know, when you make this brew up, why are you using potato? Why can't you use like molasses or, because I know that a lot of aerated compost to use, there's a lot of people who use like blackstrap unsulfured molasses. Well, why couldn't you use that in it? Well, technically you could, but you're going to be basically selecting for a different set of biology. And one of the things that happens with high sugar, simple sugar type feeds is it does tend to favor organisms that do create acids. So this is a more balanced approach. Again, it seems to be a better feed. It doesn't change the pH, so you're not having to really super dilute it. And that's kind of why we're sticking with a complex starch like a potato, or even, you know, in some cases, if you don't have access to potato, you can use other things that are complex starches. Like if you're in Hawaii, you could probably use taro, or you could use sweet potato. Some people have done that. You could also use grains if they're kind of processed a little bit to be softened up. So, I mean, you can do different things, but the easiest thing to use is just a potato. So let's do the harvest. Okay, how to harvest JMS. It's very complicated. What we're going to do is, this is a multi-step process, so we're going to walk you through it real slowly. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to unplug the heater. It should come out nice and easy. And we'll remove that from the bucket. Then the next thing we're going to do is remove what's left of the inoculant. Just kind of let it drizzle out a little bit. And we'll set that aside to be cleaned later. And then the last step is pull out the thermocouple for the thermostat. Okay, this is how we transport. We use these Gamma Seal lids on the bucket. Seal it up, and she's good to go.